Welcome to Nasdaq TradeTalks, where we meet with the top thought leaders and strategists in emerging technologies, digital assets, the regulatory landscape, and capital markets. I'm your host, Jill Malandrino, and joining me on the desk at the Nasdaq market site is Louisa Wong, CEO of XR Extreme Reach, Laura Martin, Senior Analyst, Media and Entertainment at Needham Co, and we have Melanie Paul Austin, PhD candidate and adjunct lecturer at Baruch. We're here to discuss how enterprise, consumers, and education are leveraging AI, future opportunities, and the risk and regulation related to emerging technologies. It is great to have everyone on the virtual desk at Nasdaq. We'll kick it off with you, Louisa. AI and ML and emerging technologies are certainly driving massive economic change, particularly when it comes to the creative economy and virtually every area within the economy.
Yeah, so I think, AI has become a bit of a buzzword, I think, especially in media and entertainment. It's sort of, you put it on anything that you're doing, it becomes very attractive. I think the reality is most businesses have already been deploying AI at scale, whether it's to drive efficiencies in the business or understanding large streams of data. It's sort of how you think of AI. I think the hot topic is generative AI. So I'm going to add generative on top of that, because as I think of in the world of creativity, that's where I'm seeing to be posing most of the challenges, both for brands as well as for consumers, which is navigating authenticity. When you think of generative AI, is creating different versions of a single source of truth. And so as we think about the future, what AI presents as a disruption, whether consumers are actually consuming authentic content, right through to how brands think about generative AI to create storytelling at scale. All of these, I think, are really interesting disruptions happening in the industry today.
Mm-hmm. And Laura, from your perspective, how is Wall Street thinking about Gen AI today? Because at the end of the day, AI and ML, those are not new technologies for many financial services companies.
Yeah, I think Wall Street thinks that generative AI will disrupt everything all at once, and it will be the next big disruptor like internet was, like mobile was. And today what we're seeing is it is being used today to cut costs. So you can't go to a customer service without getting one of those chat bots. That's generative AI. And what happens next is we're going to get generative AI making short films. Mostly not used in Hollywood because the unions have said they're not allowed to use generative AI. The studios are not allowed, but you're going to see it in user-generated content over on YouTube and TikTok, where you basically put in a prompt in natural language, like show me a girl in a convertible Bentley going through an Italian street, and the generative AI will make that image, and then you can change the color of the car or the background and stream it right away. So that's the next disruption, is video content in storytelling with a really high quality from these large language models.
Right, which is interesting because you don't remove the creative and editorial human role in it, which is encouraging. So, Melanie, from a consumer and academic perspective, let's talk about trust in AI. What are some of the key themes that you're looking at?
Absolutely. So consumer trust and also consumer acceptance AI is the huge realm of research that we're looking into from the consumer behavior perspective. When AI was earlier days, it was hard to assess kind of human-like aspects of AI. So thinking about the language that AI is using is super important in garnering consumer trust. So thinking about high-level words, factual information, also data points that it can provide us is really important.
Right. And I think, Louisa, when you think about developing brands, whether it's media and entertainment, and really being able to understand your customer and the content that you want to provide going forward, what are some of the opportunities that you can leverage by using this type of technology?
Well, I want to touch on a little bit about what Laura spoke about, which is what's happening in Hollywood and what celebrities are doing with their use of likeness or even use of the tone. I think that, when you think of how AI can actually create scale behind how we think about creativity and how we actually develop creativity, the use of likeness, one thing that we're not talking about is intellectual property in the use of generative AI, right? I think that in a world where there's still lack of trust and legislation, it is hard for talent. And when I say talent, I'm not just talking about celebrities, it could be content creators, influencers, etc., alike, to relinquish control over their use of voice and use of likeness and their voice. However, in an environment where there is legislation and where there is control, you can actually scale that in a much more appropriate way that enables you to reach consumers at every corner of society. And I think today we're being a bit too myopic when we think about how we use generative AI in the use of storytelling, because it is not just one size fits all. And I think if we can actually expand the legislation behind the use of likeness in the future, when I start to think about personalization and telling one-to-one consumer stories, the use of any likeness for that matter actually enables us to tell better stories in the advertising landscape, which we're not doing today.
Right. And I think it's a great point that you bring up, because I think sometimes we don't assess risk before we think of, oh, what are the possibilities? But to your point, IP, licensing, governance, what we're doing, ethically and responsibly from the perspective of using all this data, these technologies brought together. To your point, there is no clear roadmap. And, you want to make sure that that doesn't stifle the innovation as well. Laura, do you see any of those?
Can I make another point real quick though, Jill?
Yes, of course.
So I think there's another challenge as well, which is if we're using historical data to teach AI, to create a path for the future, we're going to create much of the same of what was the past. As a rubbish in, rubbish out. We are in an environment now where we can teach AI new things and create new standards for both society and the way we do business in AI. So I think it's upon us, not just as technology companies, but content creators, content companies out there, to really think about how we work together to leverage data, not within walled gardens, but together and collectively to create a standards for AI in the future.
Right. So, Laura, are there industries that stand to win or lose with this?
So I want to build on Louisa's comment. The biggest negative of generative AI is that you have white men using these algorithms or using historical data, which is all data written by white men over these are 100 billion inputs. And guess what? Most of history has been written by the power structure. So what it delivers is not DEI. It does not deliver unbiased outputs at the other end. So that's an issue when you have 100 billion outputs. How do you make it fair in the end in today's world when 90% of what it's reading from was heavily biased towards a small segment of the economy? So that's the biggest challenge, I think, that generative AI commands. The biggest upside is, how cool is it that a kid in their 20s that's a great storyteller with natural language can give us storytelling now? It opens up the landscape for creativity, because you do not need to know how to computer program, because the AI does it for you. It writes the code for you. So if you're a great visual artist that says, I want that to be blue, or I want that to be red, or a storyteller that says, I don't want this girl to be 20, I want her to be 50, suddenly the creativity allowed by generative AI opens up to a whole new field of storytellers and creativity that needed to have computer programming in the past, so they couldn't do it.
Right. So, Melanie, when we think about AI and privacy from the consumer perspective, what are they focused on? Because there's not that much control there. They're relying on businesses to be transparent and to, use their data ethically.
Absolutely. So the onus, coming from the consumer perspective, consumers definitely believe that businesses should be the ones who are being transparent, giving them the right information to know how their data is going to be handled. Data privacy concerns are definitely number one for consumers. And I think to Laura's point, it's important that, these downfalls or negative sides of AI, such as biases that are in the algorithms, that consumers can identify those, and we can start to make some change from the consumer perspective.
What about applications in the classroom?
So that's a really interesting point. This past semester, I taught a marketing analytics course at Baruch College, and it's really interesting to see some of these standard methods such as segmentation and targeting, which is super important to marketers, being assisted by AI. So unsupervised learning tools such as K-means clustering, being able to identify patterns, behavioral patterns from consumers in large sets of data, and teaching that to my students has been a really great opportunity.
Yeah, well, that's encouraging to hear, because I remember when, ChatGPT and other Gen AI models came out when I was doing my grad work in early 2023, the first thing was, oh, it's going to change, how we're educating in the classroom and how students are using it. And certainly you can see the efficiencies and creativity that it opens up for you, because, the point that I had made to Laura before, you don't remove that, editorial and human creative and final decision-making role. Laura, Louisa, back to you for a moment here. When you think about education and advancing careers for women to be the next leaders within AI, what are your thoughts there?
Well, it brings me to a recent conference that I went to, an AI conference here in New York City. And of the 200 attendees in the room, there were 2 women in that entire conference. And that gave me cause to pause, because as I think of the diversity that's actually existing in the world of AI today, whether it's people that are choosing it as a career path, whether it's people learning it, as choosing it as a line of education, the reality of it is we've not encouraged nor have we nurtured, created career pathways for more people across the segments of society to be able to embrace AI in a meaningful way. So, I mean, listen, that was one data point, a microcosm of an example, but I've seen it at scale across just tech. Mainly in tech, what we're still seeing today is a lot of biases towards certain segments of society. And I think that if we're going to try and create equity, curriculum has to change at an early level. The way I think about recruitment has to change. It's not just about hiring from university, but hiring from people that are mid-level academia and train them using AI as a co-pilot, as a way of creating equity in their workforce. The reality of it today is I think AI is still a thing, an object that people are testing and learning. I would like to encourage more generational diversity as we think about what does AI look like in the future, because it can't just be up and comers and it can't just be Gen Xers. You have to have a spectrum of diversity represented through the generations that we could teach AI in a much more meaningful way.
Yeah, well, I think the encouraging thing is because it is dispersed virtually every job function and through multiple industries, you don't necessarily have to be a tech person to be involved within the AI ecosystem. So hopefully by the virtue of that, it'll certainly change what the landscape looks like for future generations, to your point. So Laura, it sounds as if this isn't just a fad.
Yeah, so on this point precisely, I think Wall Street is looking for the one winner that's going to be bigger than Apple, which is to say, when you think about the internet, Google and Facebook won. And then you think about mobile, Apple won. And there's winner take all economics in these globally scaled technology disruptions. Wall Street believes that generative AI is the next one, and it's looking for the Apple, Google, Facebook, and it will not be an incumbent. It will be somebody that right now is just dropping out of Harvard and getting funding. And unfortunately it's a good news, bad news. The good news is America is going to win here, and we are going to bury the EU. Wall Street believes. Why? Because they're going to try to regulate generative AI. And what capitalism does, it says, go full forward and create companies that offset the negatives. Like CrowdStrike comes right to mind for the last revolution, top of mind for all of us. Bad news. But the point is, we will create companies to stop the hacking, to do the ethical treatments. We'll create companies around the negatives, but we will race forward. So there's lots of kids working in garages trying to be the winner that will be worth $3 trillion. And by the way, along the way, we're going to cut a lot of costs. We're going to have a lot of innovation. And then we're going to go to Europe and our cost structures will be lower here and our creativity will be lower. And they will have stood still because they're so petrified by the ethical and algorithmic challenges of such a sweeping, disruptor as generative AI.
So you don't think the Web 2.0 incumbents will have as much influence in Web 3? I can't imagine like Google, Apple, Amazon, just passing the baton. It's not an integration of the two?
Nope, I do not think so. I think when you have disruptive technology, the tech stack that those old technologies, like Microsoft was the winner originally, it didn't win with the web. They have a tech stack that links them to the past. And the kid dropping out of Harvard starts with a clean piece of paper and says, how do I optimize for what's available now? So, just look at NVIDIA, up 2,000%. That company is benefiting from this revolution. And that's what disruption is. It doesn't maybe kill what came before, but it isn't the big winner.
Right. And Melanie, when you think about how this can evolve in terms of education and for, the next generation of educators, what do you think that looks like?
I definitely think that collaboration is a huge piece of education. So being able to integrate AI tools into the classroom, but also do it in a thoughtful, purposeful way. So explaining to the students, kind of to Laura's point before, you don't need to know how to do coding, but know what the AI tool is doing for you and understand. So when we combine traditional, forecasting methods or calculating customer lifetime value using an AI tool, it's still important that students are understanding the processes behind it and why we need to understand these concepts and how AI can be kind of a collaborative tool. And also, I think some of the biggest trends in AI, some of the bigger sectors like finance and healthcare are benefiting from having human oversight in the AI tool usage.
Right. And Louisa, to wrap up here, it's not something that can be done in silos. right? I mean, there has to be collaboration across the board and, across the entire enterprise, where it's not a creator has one role, this person has one role, and et cetera. I mean, you have to be thinking about it in a collaborative way when it comes to risk management and cyber and your tech stack, to Laura's point earlier. So this really can't be something that's just siloed within one specific area.
No, absolutely not. And I think Laura's point is absolutely right. I don't think the clear answer is in front of us. I think most companies now are going through massive business transformation, try and figure out what their new proposition in this new world actually exists. I've seen actually quite a few tech companies just in the last 30 days alone get rid of their head of products, get rid of their head of technology. These are what we used to think critical infrastructure roles, so a lot of these big tech companies. But I think they see a different path and a different answer to the future. And that's a massive business transformation that I'm seeing occurring, not just within the organization that I run, but with my competitors and my peer group as well in the same space. Everybody's trying to grapple, what does the human and machine piece look like? Because the reality of it is, we're not just all about the science, right? The science element to how we actually deliver creativity is one element of it. The art of creativity and the heart of creativity is still really critical as we think about what our ecosystem looks like in the future. So this disruption is only the beginning. And I think we're on a journey. What I would look out for in 2026 is M&A activity of, the garage startups and big conglomerates out there looking what does the 1 + 1 = 3 look like in the future.
All right. Appreciate everyone's insight. Thanks for joining us on Trade Talks. I'm Jill Malandrino, Global Markets Reporter at Nasdaq.